My name's Sam Ori. I'm the executive director here at the Energy Policy Institute at the University of Chicago. And it's my pleasure to welcome all of you here for what I think is going to be really just a terrific discussion on how India became the most important country in the global climate fight. As some of you may know, we've had the terrific pleasure of hosting a group of 12 distinguished members of the Indian Parliament here at EPIC this week for meetings and knowledge exchange. I really want to offer for all of you for being here. It's been really engage with our community this week to share your perspectives and to engage with you. I also want to extend a special welcome to who's here joining us tonight as a special guest as well. Now, this is the 5th year that we're hosting a group like this, which is a testament not only to India's importance and central role in energy and climate issues, but also to the university's commitment to India. And each time that we host a group of these MPs, we produce a public one tonight featuring members of parliament engaging in timely and I think essential conversations with other experts and leading voices in energy and climate. As I mentioned, I'm especially excited for what we have for you tonight. So let me introduce our to the discussion. We're to be joined by 2 members of parliament of the Indian Parliament here tonight. Rahul Kaswan, member of the 17th Lok Sabha of the government. Churu, Rajasthan. Welcome, Rahul. We're also honored to have with us Srimati Mahua Moitra, also member of the 17th Lok Sabha of the Government of India, where she represents Krishnanagar, West Bengal. Welcome, Mahua Moitra. We have here also with us U.S. diplomat Vinay Chawla, a senior advisor on climate finance to U.S. Special Envoy for Climate, John Kerry. Vinay has close to 20 years of experience across South Asia. And, in addition to the great honor that we have to have Vinay here joining us, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that when I started my career after graduating from Harris here in 2003, the first job that I had out of graduate school, I went to work for 4 years as a fellow, and my first overseas posting was about a year at the embassy in Delhi. And when we were organizing this event, I was talking to some colleagues at the State Department about who would be just the best person to have on this panel, and they mentioned, oh, you should have Vinay Chawla, and I said, wait a minute, I know that name. And Vinay and I worked together for about a year in India almost 20 years ago, so this has a kind of a special sort of personal connection for me on this panel. So welcome, Vinay. From EPIC, we have our own Michael Greenstone, who is the Milton Friedman Distinguished Service Professor in Economics, the College and the Harris School, and is an economist here at UChicago and faculty director of both EPIC and the Becker Friedman Institute for Economics. You're welcome also. Last but not least, moderating our conversation, we're thrilled to have Time Magazine's climate reporter, Justin Warland, who is EPIC's Journalism Fellow this year. I should say that Justin's recent writing on climate issues in India was really the inspiration for tonight's event and the title of tonight's event. He had an article come out in February entitled How India Became the Most Important in the Global Climate Fight. So I can't imagine a better person to lead this conversation. Justin, thank you for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you for having me and inviting me to lead this very important, timely discussion. I think to kick it off, this is such a big topic with significant global implications, obviously significant climate and energy implications on the ground in India. I want to just ask each of you a question to set the context about what does the climate and energy challenge in India mean for you and your work, and I'll frame it differently for each of you, but just that sort of broad framing. And so we'll start with you, Ms. Moitra. What does the energy and climate challenge in India mean to you and your work, and particularly in West Bengal?
When we talk about in the West and in developing countries, we're more concentrating on climate. But in India, the challenge now is still energy. We are not, Michael was mentioning yesterday, there's, I think, 770 million people in the world still lack access to reliable electricity. So our challenge is really to make sure that we get, to meet the energy demands of people. So that's one of our challenges. And keeping that in mind, then the climate comes next. So it's very easy to say that, move away from coal, but we've seen through the Ukraine crisis that when the West, at the first instance of a crisis, people jumped back into coal. But if you think about India, we've been in crisis, we're in a perennial state of crisis. So it's a little more of a tightrope walk for us, because we've got to deal with energy needs as well as what's happening around us when it comes to the climate.
Mr. Kaswan, I don't like to add on that.
Yeah, I will be saying the same thing which Mr. Moha says. Yes, we are in that process that we need our energy requirements, and that has to be completed. Rajasthan is a huge, the big state, and in my state, if I talk about, then the way, when I became member of parliament in 2014, 100% of villages were electrified. But then the 100% power you need some time for that, and we are in that process, which we are going to achieve 100% of it. And there's times we can't be compared with all the developed countries, and the developing country India has to sustain that thing. And I hope that it will take some time. This is the right time to talk about. Yeah, there are a lot of transition periods there. We are shifting to renewable energy. The government is serious also. And the first time in the last so many years, the government of India has formed the renewable ministry in itself, which is separate from the power ministry. So a lot of things we are in a transition period, and I hope that things will be changing soon. And first, our requirements should be met. That should be our more priority.
Great. Well, Michael, I'd like to turn to you for the sort of same question, just to give a macro picture, touching on the development challenges and the climate challenges and the balance of that. How do you see the picture?
Yeah, I think India in some ways is the most interesting and most important place in the world with respect to the climate and energy challenge. And, you know, I was trying to think about it as we're thinking of your question. First, it's a place where electricity consumption and energy consumption remains far below most of the rest of the world. Maybe 1/12 or 1/13 of what it is in the United States. And so the need for more energy is absolutely paramount. It is also the place where the current sources of energy are producing air pollution that are causing terrible health problems and causing people to lead shorter and sicker lives. And that problem can't be thought of in isolation from the electricity problem. And then on the climate side, which my own view is it's the third leg of this stool, and in some sense not quite yet the most important one from my sense of the Indian perspective. India still remains a very small polluter of CO2 relative to the rest of the world, both historically and even per capita today, although that's expected to change. And it is also in the total bullseye of where climate damages are going to be located. And so when you put all of that together, what is evident is that there's a series of very complicated and challenging trade-offs associated with to think only of more energy is to ignore the other two problems, and to think only of climate is to ignore the other two problems. Yep. And what India is going to have to do is chart its own path through that somewhat complicated maze of competing goals.
So Vinay, I want to turn to you for a U.S. perspective on India's energy and climate challenges. How do you see it? How does the U.S. see it? And then sort of as a follow on to that, what are you doing? What is the U.S. doing to try to help address those challenges?
Sure, and thank you again to the University of Chicago for hosting the event, including me, and Justin, thank you for moderating. I would say we often talk about, in the international community, the perception is that we focus on the challenges, what India needs to do, or other countries in the international context need to do to curb emissions, because we define so much by ambition and getting to net zero by 2050. And I think India is unique in that one can always talk about what we can do on the fossil side and what we can do to focus on emissions. But to me, it's really an investment opportunity. And I say that from every angle, and I focus on finance for Secretary Kerry, and I think of sources of capital, whether I think about concessional money from governments, whether I think about philanthropy, whether I think about institutional investors, and institutional investors being the asset owners, the one that actually have the trillions, not even the fund managers. And where do they want to put their money? And if you ask any one of them, the most exciting opportunity is India for scale of, and this being at the intersection of climate. Whether it be mitigation and renewables and solar power plants and wind, whether it be new technologies like green hydrogen, whether it be e-mobility and diversifying the supply chain and seeing real manufacturers of things like buses and two-wheelers and three-wheelers all really being in India. And I think where part of the stress or the tension is that what we say is that India is a model. It's the lowest hanging fruit. It's the third largest producer of renewables in the world deployed at about 11 to 12 gigawatts a year. But the pace that the Prime Minister has set and the country has set for itself, it wants to be at 50. So how do we help India go from 11 to 50, which is a huge investment opportunity? And then how do we make that a model? And I think sometimes there's a tension, I think, for the Indians to say, well, we're trying to get our house in order. Do we really need to be, everything shifts on India? India matters critically. It matters for investment opportunity, I think, and it matters as a model for the rest of the world. And what it's done so successfully to deploy renewables, but then also what it could showcase that it could do in other sectors, green steel, green cement, green fuel, all kinds of areas where I think India is primed to be a player.
Great. Yeah, that's all great comments to help lay the groundwork for this conversation. I want to pick up on that investment opportunity in renewables and talk and ask a bit about what the government's targets are, what needs to be done to meet those targets. And I'll go to Mr. Kaswan first. In Rajasthan, for anyone who's been there, is huge deployment of solar and wind. You can see that investment on the ground now. What needs to be done to grow the renewable sector to meet the targets, and what are those targets for context?
So I will say that in India, in the last 8.5 years or 9 years of this government, what we have achieved is a complete big transition from of nearby 396%. We have touched 180 gigawatts of renewable energy in this country. Government has been exploring all the possible opportunities which we have in front of us, and maybe the newly launched the green hydrogen mission, which itself has a big budget of 18,000 crore rupees. And Rajasthan being the biggest land bank which we have and the most sunny days which we have with us, we are in the lead, I think so. And a lot of work is being done and a lot has to be done, and we are on the right path of being a zero by 2070. And I think being my state or my constituency, for us it matters a lot. How can we generate more investment to our constituency or to our state because of being that kind of a landmass which we have with us, and we are on the right track. And I think the government is taking a lot of initiatives as per what our target is. But 2030 we have to become the 50% dependent on renewable energy. I think we are on the right track, and whatever possible opportunities are there, we are exploring them. And green hydrogen mission is one of the best projects which I think India will be seeing in the future, and will create a lot of investment, and come nearby a lot of job creation will be done in that also.
Yeah. Following up from what Rahul said, is one of the things that we are, if you think about let's look at just cooling demand. Let's look at one side of it, which is cooling demand. So 8% of current Indian households use air conditioners now. Now that number is supposed to go up to something like 40% by 2040, by 2038. Now, when you think about, and when is that demand peaking? It's peaking from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. And that's, you're not getting solar energy. Our challenge right now, it's not just storage deficiency that we need to fill, and at a very local level. So, yes, we need something like 10 to 12 10 gigawatt plants, storage plants all over India right now. But apart from that, we need at the rural level, for example, my area, if you're looking at a village, like just the other day, I needed to electrify, there was this one hamlet which had been electrified, but then over time, the river silted over and it became an island. So, there are about 200 families that didn't have electricity. It's near Krishnanagar, which you're familiar with. I was talking to a student here who's from there. And one of the things that we had solar panels, but it wasn't working. And the cost of, if we could have just storage during that peak time, so you need something which are much more local solutions, like solar pumps that we need to bring in. So sometimes we need to have an FDI into the renewable sector. Last year was the highest ever, something like $1.6 billion. And I think it's been 13 billion since 2010. So you can see how last year really peaked. But aside from that, that's just into big projects. But we really need to look at hamlet and last rural mile electrification and last rural mile renewables. And for that, we need something like very localized storage solutions.
Right. Well, I mean, it might be good to pick up, you mentioned the 1.6 billion number in FDI for renewables. that's a big number, but it's clearly not as big as it needs to be. I think it's fair to say. I mean, Vinay, I might turn to you to ask, how do you see getting multiples of that 1.6 billion? What are you doing to help make that happen, and what needs to be done more broadly?
Sure. Anticipating the question of money might come up, I noticed on the schedule this week that the MPs had a session on AI today. And I said, oh, because I had actually asked AI, what should an American diplomat say when asked by a country like India, where is the money? And how do you respond? And so I had it all scripted, but if you had a session on AI, you might know that it's AI. But it said, be empathetic, understand that it's that there's a real problem here, point to your programs, point to your future programs, and move on. So I won't quote the exact quotes that AI gave me, and we'll actually probably take a different tack to say, it's understandable that more finance is needed, that a lot of countries, with India being a leading voice, feel that not enough money is moving. I would say, and for those that haven't read Justin's article, I think it lays the argument out pretty clearly. Is the solution partly market and policy driven, which India is pursuing, or is one focused on trying to limit fossil? And I think India is banking on renewable from a market policy perspective, and I think the money needs to match that.
Yeah.
And as I said at the top of my comments, if you talk to philanthropy that wants to see a 1,000 to 1 leverage because they're giving grant money, they often look at R&D, technical assistance. They don't think about how does my money make a project work. But we're saying in India, de-risking projects, helping take some of the risk off is a real opportunity. And so we try and get philanthropy involved. And they often are very eager to do that in India because you have the scale. So for example, SECI is a great model of India that we would argue should be considered around the world of providing offtake guarantees when your various utilities, either national or local, can't pay their bills. You put an intermediary in the middle, you put some money as an escrow, and all of a sudden the developer who's going to various banks can tell the bank, I can pay the mortgage every month because there's a payment security. So if it costs almost $1 billion to build a gigawatt, if you put a 500 million guarantee in the middle, the way India has, but we think could go even further, you can support almost $30 billion of investment. So again, we're trying products like that. And how do we use scarce concessional money that either philanthropy has, that government has, and even investors have? Another model, I think, where India is quite impressive is in the National Infrastructure and Investment Fund, NIF. Now, if anyone is into investments, this is an organization that charges 65 basis points, has no carried interest. So you have an Indian, half private-owned, half government-run infrastructure institute that wants to do more, that needs capital. And the kind of capital we need to bring in, and you will see vast amounts of capital, if it goes anywhere today, it goes into India. But when you look at a sector like renewables, it's often on the equity side. And I may be putting the audience to sleep with a little bit of this, but equity side means the returns are, for the dollar you put in, you want a 20% return, 15% return on the dollar side. And what India needs is lots of cheap debt. And how do you make that debt? But you can get that through asset owners. And ultimately, I think as I've seen in the last few years working with Secretary Kerry on this, renewable infrastructure, like all infrastructure, ultimately belongs and should belong in the hands of local citizens in that country. Not only because that's where you may have independence and security, but that's also your cheapest form of capital. If a life insurance company of India subscriber is holding a bond on a renewable assets, it's in rupees. And so then if I lent to a project in dollars, which is the money we need to draw into India even more on the debt side, I need to convert that to rupees. I need my dollar back. I don't want to leave it for a 30-year project, for a solar project. So how do I move it in the local bond market? And again, India provides a deep example, an exciting example of deep capital markets. India has taken airports and put that in the local bond market. So you borrow money at double digit before you built your solar park. But then in India, because you have so many renewables, you can securitize that and put that in the local bond market. And again, these are areas we as the international community, I think the tension is sometimes you, as a developed world, need to bring $100 billion every year. And we're trying, and that was what we promised in Paris. And we aren't yet meeting that goal. But how do we mobilize? Does it have to be $100 billion in grant? Sometimes, the new argument is it should be $1 trillion. Is it all trillion, or is it just unlocking the potential of investment and driving renewables, green hydrogen? And I think India's example, where the investment side, as your article pointed out, is the way to go.
Yeah, it's very, very, very good point, and I want to follow up maybe to Michael on this. I mean, you mentioned SECI, you mentioned some other sort of institutions, innovations. I guess I'm curious, what sort of policies, what sort of things beyond just finance can help advance the transition in India?
Yeah, so I think, look, the only reason we're here talking about all this is because the fossil fuels, if you don't use if you don't use correcting taxes on them, are less expensive than the non-fossil fuels. So like, if that problem didn't exist, we could go home, we wouldn't have to be here, we could talk about something, we could find some other problem to focus on. And so one solution that I think, and I also am extremely sympathetic to, would find it enormously challenging to run for Senate in the state of Ohio with the idea that, oh, our platform is we're going to send a bunch of money to India and help them buy non-fossils. Like, that's not going to happen. So I think among the feasible set, I think what the developed world should be doing is investing tons of money on R&D of new energy technologies. And just shooting money around and turning over the cards and hoping we get lucky and we find something that makes it so that people in India are like, well, coal's too expensive. We'd rather use this new technology. And I think until that delta, that is the difference between the cost of the fossil fuels and non-fossils, shrinks more, and it's shrunk a lot already, but until it disappears, it's going to be very, very hard to convince India, and it's going to be very, very hard to convince other countries around the world that it's such a good idea to switch to non-fossils.
Yes.
Yeah, just following up from when I was saying, one of the problems in India has been that it's very difficult to get policy consistency, because every state, the renewable purchase obligations differ state to state. So if you're looking as an investor coming in, then there's no sort of one policy for across. That's the first. The second is that the policies are for 5 years. So if you come in as a developer, you are running the risk of something changing every 5 years. That's the second thing, especially if you're looking at a leveraged asset. You want steady cash flows that you can leverage, and you want as much transparency as you can looking into the future. That's the second thing. The third thing is that developers face a risk from the state electricity regulatory commissions. So any delay in payments by the SERCs, who are ultimately going to be the buyers of this, hits the developers. So when we're talking about large-scale investment into the renewable sector, this is something that we've started to address, but this kind of policy inconsistency across states, because when you're looking to sell in the bond market, if you want to sell it, then are you going to sell Gujarat bonds in only Ahmedabad? Or are you going to do it all India? Where do you sell it?
Right.
Every state doesn't have a local bond market to do it. It's not the way. So it's a bit tricky.
Right.
So this is something we need to look at.
Yes, I mean, it is interesting how so many of these challenges on the surface can be, oh, more money is needed, but actually there are all of these complicated layers that make this finance more challenging. I want to talk a bit about industrial policy, talk a bit about the Inflation Reduction Act here, which has implications for India, but also hydrogen has come up, green hydrogen has come up. So let me just start very broadly and ask, what do you think industrial policy should look like in India? What does it look like in your assessment? I guess we can start, I don't know, start with Mr. Kaswan, since you haven't spoken, or spoken in a while, or we can go to someone else if you prefer.
Let Mr. Chawla start. He's the most expert.
This is another question I should have asked AI. I will say the Inflation Reduction Act, we felt it was a monumental moment, and it is a monumental moment for the United States and our commitment to fight climate change. I think one of the things that was a little bit more unexpected is the concerns that were raised not only by countries in Europe, but India as well, that were we having an inadvertent negative impact, and that we were creating programs meant to drive jobs and the fight on climate change here in the United States by making green hydrogen subsidized at $3 a kilogram, that it was actually going to hurt the possibility to do the same thing or build green hydrogen in India. And we had, with this group can be quite frank and on a camera and all of that, but we'll say that I've talked to Indian government counterparts that found that quite frustrating, because they were actually looking, and it wasn't just international investment that could have come in. This is the conglomerates in India, the Ambanis and others who were planning or are still planning to do green hydrogen in India, but now found attractive opportunities in the United States.
Yeah.
And so one of the questions was, well, can the IRA subsidy be extended to India or to parts of Europe? And I think we find that part of it quite challenging, because the IRA is driven to fight climate change, but also to focus on the U.S. economy and drive jobs here. And that's just sort of a fact of the state. But that doesn't mean that we can't coordinate industrial policy. That can't mean that there's a potential where, as Michael was saying, whether it's through research, R&D, where we can talk about India being the home of electrolyzers, because not enough can be made to support the IRA Act. And we can be the producer of large part of green ammonia, which becomes a liquefied form of green hydrogen, where you're taking water, splitting up the atoms, you have the hydrogen gas, you now have a fuel cell, you have to liquefy it, so you turn it into ammonia, and you can ship that to India. Or markets between each other. In the absence of free trade agreements, or if that's fallen out of favor a little bit or hard to do, coordinating industrial policy between countries like the United States and India is a real opportunity to tackle climate change and find the investment opportunity, I think together. So that would be our view, or at least my view, on industrial policy, and I think what we're trying to do with the government of India and other countries.
Well, I mean, India has been doing, various industrial policy programs. Make in India, which is not specifically renewables or green, has been one thing, but there's also this $8 billion commitment, I believe, in February around hydrogen, other things as well. I guess I would just be curious to hear from you all, what your thoughts are about the current state of Indian industrial policy around energy, and what you would like to see. I don't know if that's okay.
I mean, we've just come up with this last year in August. It was that we had the new energy bill, renewable energy bill, and so India's definitely made a commitment now to move towards renewables. And I was talking with my colleague here who's in this space in India. And so what we've got is coal, and it's not that we can move away from coal. I mean, we're committed to moving away from coal in the by 2050, of course. But while anything that is coming up in new capacity, we are meeting all our targets, be it solar, be it hydrogen, be it in all the new renewable sector, we are meeting all our targets. But having said that, it is not possible for us to move away from coal. We have to get down to less than 50%, which is not where we are now. But the policy is still towards, and whatever we are doing now is we're meeting our targets in the renewable sector. So that's important.
Right. But this,
No, I thought Rahul might, because he was talking about green hydrogen before we started.
Right, I think it's important.
95% is still grey hydrogen, right, worldwide, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't it? Isn't
Grey
that
hydrogen is a challenge.
Isn't 95% of the world's thing is still grey hydrogen from grey sources?
Yeah,
meaning using
from grey
gas.
sources
Yeah,
only,
grey sources only, right?
But a lot of projects are coming in the country, yeah.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to maybe give you an opportunity to talk about the opportunity of green hydrogen, both for the power sector and decarbonization, but also just as an industry in India.
So with the green hydrogen project, which I think is you create a capacity to store the energy, which can be used as a cleaner source of energy you can use later on also. It can be used in the transportation system, it can be used in the marine line, everywhere industry can use that green hydrogen, and the amount of investment which is going to be around this project, and the amount of job creation and how it can be used, it will be a next future generation thing, which I think is that in renewables we are targeting hydro, solar, biomass. Also the government has come up with a very unique this policy because of the stubble burning and the pollution around and NCT, the Delhi capital area and all. So the biomass is also good, but green hydrogen is a new thing which the government has taken, has come up with a very good budget of 18,000 crore rupees. And I think industry, as Mr. Chawla was saying, yeah, there might be some challenges, which because if they are subsidized a lot in the US, and how India is going to see that is a thing to check on. But otherwise, the policy given by the government of India is wonderful, and it will create a lot of, and we, with green hydrogen, the green ammonia, we can store the energy which can be used later on. Literally, one more thing which the government of India is pushing is waste to electricity, waste to energy, which is also a good potential area to be taken on, because every city we are generating a lot of waste which can be converted to a proper energy is also a good opportunity which renewables we can think of it.
Michael, do you?
Yeah, the only thing I would add on industrial policy, maybe to go beyond this panel a little bit, is in general, there's like some skepticism about how the dollars are spent or the rupees are spent and whether or not they're spent efficiently. But I think the last decade or 10 or 15 years has changed my mind a little bit about this with respect to energy. China set off on an enormous industrial policy maybe 10 or 12 years ago around solar. And we're all reaping the benefits of this. In fact, I would bet $1 that India's embrace of renewables was made possible by the reductions in costs of solar that China helped drive over the last 10 or 12 years. And so, in a way, if there's a industrial policy war between the United States, Europe, and India and elsewhere, one beneficiary of that could well be the planet, because that's what we need. Is we need to drive down the costs of the other energy sources, and that is, I'm not saying we would have drawn that out from first principles as the right climate policy, but it ends up having this really appealing. It can end up having this very appealing outcome.
Well, just to follow up on that, I mean, I think some in the administration would say Inflation Reduction Act is doing that. It actually is a benefit to India, which of course is not, as you very delicately said, is not the position, I think, of the Indian government. I mean, not to put you on the spot there, but what do you think? I mean, is the Inflation Reduction Act, sort of global benefit in that sense? I mean, Vinay, you can take that maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that it very much is that, because it's meant to drive the prices. Supply chains are meant to be global and diversified. So cheaper green hydrogen means cheaper green ammonia means available to the world market if ammonia is one. But I think even in the case of batteries and other things, I would say one way to think about industrial policy, as a metaphor Mawa mentioned, was raising the idea about coal. And India still has 50% more than coal, but clearly wants to go to renewables. And I'm reminded of a quote in Justin's articles. For those of you who haven't read it, there's a think tank person that says, India is not married to coal. And I sort of laughed to myself when I read it, because I said, well, this is where the international community keeps asking India to divorce coal. And India said, well, we're not married to it. We're just, we spend a lot of time with coal, more than 50%, but we're really spending a lot of time with renewables. And I think industrial policy maybe can force that arranged marriage and say, well, how about we make it green hydrogen, or how about we make it everything that's in renewables? And I would argue the IRA is maybe, if that metaphor can be extended there, is encouraging India and other countries to really go even further. Because again, and I may sound like a broken record here, it's really about the investment opportunity. And I think it is impingent on international partners to make it even more attractive to where you can lean in to address the variable of cost. And I would actually argue in India, India has remarkably, more than any country, it's actually made investment a little bit hard, because it's driven down the price of solar so much, and the margins are so small that you need huge amounts of capital to sort of make your return. And on a dollar-for-dollar basis, it is cheaper than coal. It's just that the challenge is the initial CapEx can be so much more expensive. And so it's, again, about how you smoothen out that curve, how you lower the cost of debt, et cetera.
It's the lowest unit per cost now.
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
The issue is the storage thing.
Yeah, the
Storage is a
Storage is the
take on,
big-
really
big
take
thing,
on
because
thermal, yeah.
you have to somehow manage both.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I think the second part of that quote, India is not married to coal, it's just what we have.
Right.
And what I think is so interesting is India also, in places like Rajasthan, has very rich renewable sources, and you just need the capital and the storage solutions to manage that. Michael, I know you wanted to come in.
Yeah, so I was thinking about what I want to say today. 2 points. One, which I've already made, is I think R&D that would shrink the delta between the fossils and non-fossils, be it through industrial policy or whatever the political process can manage, terrific. The second thing, a purely domestic Indian issue, and talking of coal, I think it's relevant. Yes, coal is very, very cheap to run generators, but the use of coal without environmental controls is an enormous problem, not for the United States. It's not a problem for other countries. It's a problem for India. And I think this problem is ignored, but it's a thread through this whole, not ignored, but doesn't receive enough attention, and yet it's a key thread through this whole climate and energy challenge. And right now, there's a very unlevel playing field in the Indian electricity system, where coal gets a free pass for all the conventional air pollution that it provides. And that's not, I don't think that would be being, coerced by international forces to level the playing field there. That's like in India's own interest. And so I think that would be my second policy recommendation. That would be India specific. The other is R&D for the world.
So is that suggesting carbon tax is what you're suggesting in that?
So actually, that would be if you were targeting CO2, but I would call a PM or a particulate matter or SOx tax, absolutely, or cap and trade or whatever your favorite version of it is, but some way to allow people in India to breathe cleaner air and lead longer and healthier lives.
It was quite interesting, the statistic we were reading a couple of days ago was that if you reduced PM25 levels in India to WHO levels, it would increase life expectancy by something like 5 years. That's incredible, right? I mean, and 1.2 billion people in India are living below WHO standards. 1.2 billion people are living below what is the permissible limit.
Yeah.
And also would, while not responding to international pressure, would also have knock-on climate effects as well.
Climate co-benefits, we might call them.
So I guess we're almost going to turn to audience questions, but I just want to ask one more question for our MPs here, which is just where are your constituents on these issues? How are they feeling about this energy challenges, and how do you communicate with them about them?
You take it first.
Right now, they need 24-hour power supply. That's a more important issue for them. Because you see, it depends, the country is too vast, and issues which are in the NCR area or on the metropolitan cities, which might not be into remote constituencies like us. For people like us in my constituency, still date, some 30,000 people need electric connections. So for them, this is not that major idea in their concern right now. But yes, global warming, climate change is impacting people in our constituency. Again, and my colleagues will be a little bit irritated because I will be sharing about Churu. So my constituency is Churu, which has touched in 2019 51 degrees centigrade. So that's a temperature which is literally a concern for them, but again, then the usage of electricity has given people a chance to use coolers and ACs to just cool them down in that temperature. But right now, that is not the issue right now in my constituency. The issue in the state of like Rajasthan, which is too big, and we are a growing state right now, and people want that we need power 24/7. That's the more important thing right now.
Mm.
Yeah, it's funny. So I have, like him, I have a completely 100% rural constituency, and whenever we are, you ask the question about what do people in your area think about climate change, and I keep thinking of that line in Pygmalion, George Bernard Shaw's Pygmalion, where Doolittle is asked, he's selling his daughter, and he says, "Have you no morals, man?" And he says, "Can't afford them, governor." So it's exactly the same. I mean, when your primary interest is 100% electrification and you just need to meet energy needs. Yes, people are aware. People tell me, poor people in my constituency tell me, 10 years ago, we didn't need a fan. And now look at us,
yes.
It's so warm. Look at the floods, look at the heating, look at the heat wave. So people can tell why it's happening. So there is a lot of awareness just based on what they can feel. But the link between that and using more power, and that is still a tenuous link for most people. And that's a challenge that we've got something as part of these COP26, COP27, we've got this LIFE, which is the lifestyle for environment challenges, which we have to tell people in their everyday life that this is a cycle. But that is a challenge that is still, for rural areas such as ours, still, frankly, a rather uphill task.
Well, I think the LIFE program is so striking because it encourages people to take action, but in fact, as has been pointed out, electricity consumption is far lower than most places, and even still the LIFE program is trying to encourage that action. Thank you to the panel.